Usually, I'm awake about 3.5 to 4 hours prior to eating something at 7 a.m. I wonder if I'm considered a morning person. I mean, it's still dark outside. Breakfast for me probably can be considered an early lunch. Probably not. Every once in a while, I really like to eat something different to start my day. The time of the year is a huge influence in that, as I try to get fruits and veggies that are optimal for the season. This meal is an eggless, plant-based springtime frittata that is high in protein, loaded with plenty of springtime vegetables, and will help you completely forget about daylight savings time. Nope. Doesn't help you do that last part. We're starting out the meal by pressing the excess water out of our tofu with this device as we continue to prep the rest of the meal. This is a tofu press, and as a brief explanation, this is how it works. You have a base that catches the excess water, a spring to provide tension, a midsection with holes that holds your tofu but also allows water to escape. Then finally a top that you use to place over your tofu and clamp down to squeeze out the water. I almost never skip pressing out my tofu. This helps the texture and the taste for all the seasonings. Outside of a tofu variation made from another source other than soy, I wouldn't really recommend a substitution, as this recipe's likeness to a frittata depends heavily on its texture. Oh, and before starting anything, preheat your oven first. I always forget this if I don't do it right before I do everything else. This is one of those recipes that if you're using a high-speed blender, standard blender, or a food processor, it's not gonna make a huge difference in the final result. Although I enjoy the smoothness? No. I enjoy the smoothest texture possible. With the additional add-ins, you won't even realize the smoothness with so many competing textures. Man, that was hard. Honestly, at the very least, you could even use a hand blender to, mix things up. No pun intended. Within the blender, we add cornstarch, which you could swap for arrowroot powder or even potato starch. As for the seasonings, they're pretty straightforward, outside of the all-purpose and maybe the Italian seasoning. All-purpose seasoning, also known as complete seasoning or everything seasoning, not to be confused with everything bagel seasoning. With that seasoning, you're in a completely different ballpark. I try to choose an all-purpose seasoning that has paprika inside of its blend. If not, I'll add a 1/4 teaspoon of it just to enhance the flavors a little bit. As for Italian seasonings, it dominantly has oregano, basil, rosemary, and marjoram. But it's a plus if you have one that has thyme and sage in it. If not, I also add a pinch of each of those seasonings in there as well. I don't know, nothing says good morning like herby spices on the palate. Although I did say before, I'm eating breakfast around lunchtime, so you do have that. Once we get cooking, it's gonna be really important to consider that you have an oven-proof skillet, as this really eases the process of moving from the stove to the oven seamlessly. In this recipe, I use a 10-inch cast iron skillet, which is naturally non-stick and helpful for getting natural iron into the diet. If you don't have one, no worries. You could do your recipe in a skillet, then move your ingredients right over to a casserole dish or a cake pan. Pending the size of your cake pan, say if you go with like a 8-inch cake pan, your frittata is gonna end up roughly about 1 inch thick. On the other hand, if you kept things in the 10-inch cast iron skillet, your frittata is gonna end up being roughly about 1/2 inch thick. Of course, if you choose to transfer your ingredients, don't forget to grease whatever that new vessel is, as you don't really want tofu scramble from trying to scrape your frittata out of the vessel. Now that we started cooking, if you're choosing to go with plant crumbles, start that first, set it aside, and then pick up the recipe from the onions. There are plenty of different springtime vegetables you could choose to put in here. My choices were based on trying to load this up with as many greens as possible. Regardless of your choices, it's gonna be important to understand how each one of your vegetables cook, because this is gonna determine at what point of the cooking process it goes into the skillet, and once it goes in the oven, is that gonna help or hurt the dish? An example of that would be, I lightly cooked the asparagus and finished it off in the oven, but that wouldn't work the same for the texture I was looking for with my spinach. Finally, if you really want an eye-catching frittata, consider adding some of your cooked vegetables on top, or even some raw ones, like red onions, cherry tomatoes, right before putting it into the oven. Check out the description for the link to this recipe, or head over to my website, makeitdairyfree.com, and search frittata. Thank you so much for hanging out with me. Until next time, believe in good. Peace.